you all on behalf of CERGE-EI and the think tank IDEA, Institute for Democracy and Economic Analysis, and welcome you for an event which we cherish and like very much because it's a continuation of our long-term collaboration with the Embassy of Switzerland. Let me welcome the new ambassador of Switzerland to the Czech Republic, Ambassador Philippe Guex, as well as Professor Rafael Lalive from University of Lausanne. It is wonderful to have you present here, as well as people from CERGE-EI, IDEA, and the guests who are here for today. It is a pleasure to have another annual event, which we now try to organize every year, and it has been very successful. It is wonderful to have today such an august group here together. Mr. Ambassador, it is a pleasure to welcome you in the Czech Republic and at CERGE-EI and IDEA in particular. On a personal note, I'd like to say I have a very close relationship to Switzerland, which provided me with political asylum when I was a teenager and had to leave communist Czechoslovakia at the time. And my sister, who is a naturalized Swiss citizen, and her family live in Lausanne, in fact, where Professor Lalive comes from. So it is also a personal note where I am very pleased that we have this event together. And I'm looking forward to us sharing the very interesting insight that Professor Lalive will provide. And Mr. Ambassador, if you would be so kind and say a few words for the introduction as well. Let me just mention for everybody here who doesn't know CERGE-EI and IDEA, we are an American-style PhD program in economics, started 30 years ago, a foremost research institution as well. Our economists cover the entire gamut of economic science, published in the leading economic journals. And the think tank IDEA, which we started 12 years ago, is oriented towards working on important issues, policy-oriented issues that are useful for the Czech Republic in particular, the policymakers here, and for Europe and the global economy in general. So it is wonderful that we have this collaboration, and Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. First of all, a warm welcome to the whole audience of this online conference, and a special greeting to you, Mr. Director, as well as to our keynote speaker, Professor Lalive from the University of Lausanne. This online conference will be dedicated to the public policies which support the entering and the leaving of the workforce, and those policies which are implemented upstream as well as downstream of the working life. So I understand that Professor Lalive will focus on the impact of family policies as well as pension policies on the labor market. The Embassy of Switzerland does cooperate for a number of years with IDEA CERGE-EI, and as I'm new in Prague, this is going to be my first attendance, and I'm therefore very pleased to continuing this cooperation with IDEA CERGE-EI. The topic of the conference on employment from a life circle perspective is crucial if we consider the time we spend at work. The Swiss population attaches a high price to issues related to working life, to employment and family. But having said that, looking at the results of referendums, Swiss people have a clearly conservative outlook with a strong liberal undertone on the matter. Allow me very shortly to mention a couple examples. Maternity leave has been several times rejected and the last time in 1999, and before being finally accepted by the population in 2004. Second example, in 2012, an additional week of holiday has been rejected, which would have been beneficial for the family life. Or another example, a fully fledged pension reform has been rejected by the population in 2016 and 2017 until a light version has been finally accepted last year. So too much talking on my side. I'm thrilled to listen to Professor Lalive as well, to the other speakers, of course. And moreover, many thanks to Mrs. Kaliskova and Mrs. Tibrova, who are going, if I'm not mistaken, moderate this conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Daniel Münich. I'm from IDEA, and I will be moderating the whole event. So let me make a technical introduction, meaning I will instruct all the participants how to operate so that everybody is happy with the event. I ask everybody to mute the microphone. I see everybody is experienced already from COVID time, so this is not a problem. Another instruction is that you can submit questions to the presenter during his presentation via chat. You can find out an icon at the bottom of your page, so you can send it there to all. I, as a moderator, will pick up a question either at the end of the keynote speech, if it's short, or I will send it to panelists at the final panel at the end. If you feel you really want to ask the question on your own, please state it in the chat. Otherwise, we would go faster and I would pick up the questions. I can assure you that the whole video will be available later for all interested parties. And there are a few more things. Yeah, about the program. The program is about giving an hour to the keynote presentation by Professor Lalive, then 2 to 10 minutes reflections on the Czech policy and academic situation, and follow with very short break, 30-minute panel discussion where we will answer hopefully your questions. So these were technical instructions, and now let me check if there is anything else. Yes, there is important point. Introduction of Professor Rafael Lalive. Before I give him a floor, I like to present key achievements and who he is. So he's professor of applied economics and econometrics at the University of Lausanne, and he's also a vice dean there for research. He obtained his PhD in economics from the University of Zurich. His research is both academic and applied. It's important. It's the same duality as IDEA is focusing on. He works on similar questions related to labor market policy, family policy, social economics, and he's teaching empirical methods for economics and management. And he is also managing co-editor of Swiss Journal of Economics and Statistics. I will not list, definitely not list his long publication records, but I will mention 3 most recent works published, which will give you an idea of what kind of research he's focusing on. The first is a study on called "Is Taxing Waste a Waste of Time? Evidence from a Supreme Court Decision." Another, "Can unemployment benefit cuts improve employment and earnings?" And third, "Does early childcare affect children's development?" Question. So there are many other things, but you are online. You can find out everything, whatever you want to know about Rafael Lalive. But what you cannot get easily is today's keynote lecture, which starts. So please, Professor Lalive, the floor, the screen, and the internet is yours for next 60 minutes. Please.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, Daniel. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Actually, I would have loved to be in Prague itself. It's not possible during the current circumstances, but I'm all the more excited that that actually you, Daniel, made it possible that we can hold this event today. Under these circumstances, it's not possible live, but I'm really excited, in fact, to finally meet Professor Švejnar. I've seen his name a lot. He's an eminent scholar in very different fields, especially in this about this period of transition from a Soviet-based model to a different, more capitalist-based model. And it's really a great pleasure for me to be in the same Zoom room with you, Professor Švejnar. I hope we can make it into the same room at some point. And if you visit Lausanne, please do call upon us. And if you visit your sister, I wanted to say, in Lausanne, then we'd be more than happy to set up something. I'm also very pleased to meet you, Ambassador Philippe. It's a great pleasure, and I'm really excited to see what the Swiss Embassy in the Czech Republic is supporting. It's something that I think of as a great way for academics and the public to discuss. And with this is really something I find is very important. I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes who organized this. It's always a lot of work, and everything went really smooth. So I'd like to talk today about policies to support entering and leaving the workforce. And I'd like to warn you right away that I'm not going to give you a very balanced account of what's out there, even though that's in a way my job. I've structured the things I'm going to show you. They're little pieces or splinters of evidence. It's always going to be evidence, but they're organized around a research agenda that I've developed with many other people, especially also with Josef Zweimüller, who visited CERGE-EI, I think last year or the year before. So if you hear me talk, I think I invite you to question me on the things that I state here, because there may be other studies that I haven't looked at. But I'd like to start with just 3 basically pictures and the first table. So the first picture I would like to show is the one from the invitation. It's a really nice graph that shows us throughout the life cycle. So we're all born at some point. We're toddlers and playing with bunnies, and then we grow up, we have nice clothes, and then we are young adults with computers, and we are in prime age, so-called. So we have a lot of work, smartphones, and then we're, at some point work life ends, and we need support like this older person. And there's some physical support, the cane, but maybe also the financial support. This becomes important at that point, because if we don't work, I mean, the way we redistribute wealth is through work, essentially. And if we don't work, then there's a question of how we redistribute wealth. So there's one important theme here, and which is that both at the end and at the beginning and at the end of work life, basically, there's a need for care. And in the middle, there's a lot of time eaten up by jobs. So what I'm going to look at is, some ways in which we manage to generate that care. And by itself, this is not so hard. We all live in families. Families help out each other. And I guess sort of historically or traditionally, it was the family that did a lot of this work. But look at this second picture here. So Bismarck, he had this idea that there was something missing in Germany at the end of the 19th century. What was missing was a system that would guarantee to everyone who was working to have the same or adequate care. He felt at some point the family is not enough, or if anything, there's a huge inequality. Some people can get care, and when they're unhealthy, some people cannot get care. So what I'll talk about today is really also about this great idea to have the whole nation state be a family where some people pay contributions to programs and other people get transfers because they need them. And it's an insurance system because we pay into it when we don't need the money. And then at some point, we may or may not draw upon the money. Third picture, work-life balance. Anyone with children of age 2 knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's, on one side, there's a lot of work at the household, and on the other side, there's an employer or an employer that would like me to do a lot what she wants or he wants. So there's a balance, and you can see this unicycle on a tightrope. That's like, you know, illustrating this work-life balance, which is very hard a lot. And so what I mean by entering this picture here, I'm really interested in to what extent do the policies that we design to generate care, do they help us to have a better work-life balance? And I'll be more explicit in that as I go along. Okay, no more pictures. Here's lots of figures, right? Way too many. If I talk to a PhD student and he shows me a slide like this, I'm not amused. But I don't want you to look at every single figure here. I'd like you to just get the general picture. So what does this slide show? This is the number of weeks of leave to the left for mothers, to the right for fathers. And there's two sub-diagrams for each. The left sub-diagram is the number of weeks actually, and the right sub-diagram is what you're being paid. So typically we have, when we think about family leave systems or social insurance around childbirth, we think of a time that's promised and an amount that's being paid. Now, what I'd like to get you here, the impression I'd like to get you from this is it's published by the OECD. So the OECD is a club of rich countries, which all, Czech Republic, Switzerland is in it. And so these are all sort of economically on the same stage, but there are huge differences in to what extent they offer leave, right? This, you can see this in this inverted population pyramid, right? So that it's sorted according to the leave length, and Switzerland in both diagrams is still there with zero parental leave for mothers, which is correct because we only have maternity leave, and zero parental leave for paternity leave for fathers, which has just changed, like Ambassador Guex just said. All right, so what will I talk about? I'm going to talk about three systems. One is parental leave. This is what we just saw. The second one is childcare. The third one is pension systems. And then the fourth one is something where I took the liberty to talk a little bit about things that may be outside of the picture. Demand for social insurance. That's more going to explaining these differences in social insurance. So let me talk about parental leave. This is this prime age couple, you know, being able to access leave. Now, why is it there? I went back, and Australia is one of the last countries to recently basically introduce parental leave. And there's a lot of text on this slide, but what this is basically the first article in the law that guarantees parental leave. The law says the parental leave scheme is there to make clear to everybody that parents need time for children, period. And the second element, pay, that's there because when parents do take leave, they need to be able to actually feed the child, right? They need to be able to go to the store and buy something. It's pretty simple, pretty basic. So I've translated this into a diagram of what this law basically wants. So this is sort of a stylized employment rate, and it's the employment rate of a working parent. Why do we see that? Because the employment rate is practically pretty high. Now, on the bottom, you see the birth of the child. That's an event that happens. It's a great event. It's one of the best events that can happen. But typically, sort of the law says, we'd like you to be able to take care of your child. So employment is going to go down, and we want that. That's actually maybe the first instance where policy actually wants to create unemployment. Why? Because there's something more important to do. That's caring for a child. It doesn't go all the way down because we're all different, and some people arrange it the way that, you know, maybe this is a mother and the father is taking care of the child, or a grandmother. Now, the key element here there's a second key element of this law, which says, you know, once the leave ends, I'd like you to be able to go back. It doesn't say you must go back, but you basically keep the, you know, whatever human capital you build up, specific or general, you keep, because we want you to be able to go back to the previous job. It's called job protection. And, you know, so the employment rate is going to go up right away for everyone who goes back. And then gradually it's going to increase for those who say, you know, I really, you know, 1 year is not enough. I need to spend 2 years with my child, and then I'm going to go back to work. So that's the intention of the law. And, you know, the first thing I wanted to share with you is a question whether that actually happens. This is a paper I did with Josef and Analia Schlosser and Andreas Steinhauer. And we just, you know, we asked a simple question. So how does the length of parental leave affect the time that you spend outside of the labor market? It's a very specific system in Austria, a flat transfer of 30% of your previous wage. I mean, it's not 30% of your wage, but it's a flat transfer of 300 euro, which equals about 30% of the average wage. It's very low. There is a job protection guarantee. It can be shared, but mostly women take it. And that's because we're looking at a period that's 30 years ago. So it's really in the past. And excuse me for that, but I'm going to go. But the basic patterns are quite similar. So what I'm going to show you is the reform that until June 1990 allowed you to take 1 year of leave, and from July 1990, 2 years. So let me show you what happened. These are all women who worked before they gave birth. We selected the sample to be that way, and you can see sort of the vertical axis is shows you the proportion, basically the employment rate. So this here is the employment rate here, and here we have months since the child was born. So from the first couple of months, the first 2 months, that's maternity leave, there's really nothing happening. There's really, employment rate is 0 because there's a mandatory maternity leave. But then after 2 months after birth, the employment rate, the proportion of women who return in month 3 and 4 is about 15%. So there are about 15% of women at that point in time who have other arrangements for childcare and return immediately and right away to the previous job. And those are typically women that in our data earned a lot. Then you can see not much happens, but then there's again sort of a spike in return to work. Those are the women who actually go back to the previous employer. And then there's a gradual process of going back to work, but you can see that's on a very low level, 40% back after leave. We'd like this to be, you know, pretty high. Why is it low? Well, some of these women are going to have a second child, and I'll talk about this some more. But another reason is there's very, very little childcare after 1 year. And so then there's really not much else you can do. The leave system is fine, and the job protection is great, but it isn't really valuable. So let me show you what happens once the reform extended the leave period. So the blue line here is now for women who had access for 2 years of leave, and the red line is just 1 year. And note, they're really separated by only 1 month. That's nice, right? Because they really basically had their child the same point of time. And so what you see is basically maybe what we expect, right? There's an immediate effect. If you extend leave, then most women who take it up, they take it up and they take it up until the end of 2 years. So in some way, we can also see that this promise of leave is extremely valuable. So having this leave is worth a lot to many of these women, and they take it up. Of course, you may wonder, if you extend the leave period, then, doesn't this affect the labor market outcomes, right? If you have long periods of leave, we know from unemployment, if you spend a lot of time in unemployment, it's much less likely that you end up in a job that has the same quality. Now, this might happen with parental leave as well, but it actually doesn't. So I'd like you to just focus here on this column. That's the reform we talked about. And here we see, how many women are employed. We see slightly fewer. Those are the women with long leave, but it doesn't really, it's not statistically significant. Earnings per calendar day are the same per day's worked. It's even, somewhat more positive. Anyway, we're not going to claim that making the leave long is going to help women's labor market trajectories. It doesn't appear to hurt them. But what I would like to show here, just to set this in, that's a piece of new evidence that came after we did this, is this doesn't mean that having a child doesn't affect the labor market trajectories of women compared to men. Here's a graph that I took that looks at German-speaking countries, and it just compares the trajectories of women. Those are the solid lines with the trajectories of men. Those are the dashed lines here. So here men, here women. And you can see before birth, almost the same patterns. They're indexed to the year before birth. But then after birth, earnings drop dramatically, and they stay lower for an extended period of time for women compared to men. So the fact of having a child and mechanisms associated around childbirth are certainly causing a damage in labor market careers. What we don't find, what we are looking at, is basically what happens if you extend leave from about here to about here. So that's like looking only at women and extending the leave duration, and that doesn't seem to add much, but no wonder, because the damage is already done, basically, to labor market careers. Okay, so one thing that's really interesting about parental leave is this promise that you can go back to the previous job, and on the other hand, the pay. I started out with this. In Australia, it's there. In most other systems, you get job protection and pay. Some systems don't have job protection. And so at some level, we'd like to understand what is the role of these two policy instruments. If we have two instruments, can't we get the same thing with just one? Because then we're saving either money or we're constraining employers less. So in another paper, we like to separate the approach, but the problem is we have great reforms, but they always change both elements, the pay element and job duration, job protection. So we were thinking long and hard. So how can we separate them? And so what we did is, what economists typically do, we built a model of how women are looking for jobs. We estimated this model using data with no reforms. And then before we go and simulate things with a model that we don't know how it works, we went to see how it predicts actual reforms. So let me show you how this worked. Here is some data on return to work. It's a situation that was in 1996 to 2000, so maybe only 20 years ago. No, it's still quite old, but you can see here the return to work profile, and the top line is really what I showed you already. The bottom line below that is the proportion returning to the same employer. You can see most women return at 18 months to the same employer. That's because then the job protection, the payment ended. Now that's the pure data, right? That's what we have. And then we go and estimate the model. And then we ask that model, well, show us the same moments that we see. So show us the same pictures in the data. And you can see it's not perfect. You know, there's some differences here, especially we have more women going back. With more women going back in the theory than in the real world. And that's because we don't capture everything. But the basic pattern is really the same. So we take this model now, and what we do is we just look at, you know, we create 4 different worlds. One is no parental leave. One is 2 years of benefits and job protection. And then we also do the 2 intermediate ones, only job protection. So you can go on leave and you can get back to your job, but you don't get paid. Or you get paid, but you can't go back. And so what we get is this picture. It's a bit blurred, and I'm sorry for that, but you basically see 4 lines here, and the 2 bottom lines, they're the ones. So what do these lines show? They're just a fraction returning to work as a function of how much you spent since your birth of the child. At 24 months, everything runs out. So you see 4 lines. The 2 bottom lines, they're the ones where women are paid in parental leave, or the parent who's taking the leave is being paid. So what does this say? If you'd like parents to take up leave, so if you like parents to spend time with their children, then there's some form of transfer that's needed. You know, they cannot live off air. And there are some, you know, there's a big chunk of parents that stay home with their child without being paid. But there are some, and that's the difference here, they need the payment to really survive or to do that. The second element, so without payment, you don't really get parents to take care of their children, which is the implicit policy objective here. Now, let's go to the second element here. At 24 months, you can see one of these lines that goes down goes just gradually up again. Here, that's a dashed line here. That's the system where we just pay, but we don't have a job protection guarantee. So what do we get here? We get parents to look after their children, but these parents need to sacrifice whatever jobs they had before. Now, if you go to this dashed dotted line, which is the situation where you have both, what you can see is you get a lot of take-up, and then at the end of leave, you get also a lot of return to work. So that's precisely what we see in this Australian policy objective, what they wanted, right? You wanted time for parents to care for their children, because that's something that's a part of everybody's life, and the state wants to participate in that. It's not just a private affair, and then also everybody should have the chance to go back. Here we see that, you know, the fact that this works is really through people who return to the previous employer. So what matters here, you know, our result is maybe one that's not very surprising, but benefits and job protection, they're 2 elements that really work together so that you can create time for care, and you can have parents go on and in their jobs. Okay, so one thing we were also interested in, it's more a bit of an Austrian particularity, is parental leave and fertility, right? If you have the system that makes working and having children more compatible, isn't there also an effect on the number of children? Or put differently, are we in systems that don't give us time to care for children and just rely on private arrangements? do we have fewer children? Because it's just difficult for working parents to combine that. That's something we looked at, and let me just show you directly the graph, how this looks like. So we're still in Austria, right? I've spent a lot of my career working on Austria, and thanks to Josef, I had access to great data. And I'm not really an Austrian myself, but I think they are, you know, producers of very interesting policy experiments. So this is the situation around your first birth, right? There's the first child being born here. And then there's parental leave. That's the two solid lines here. And then, you know, the rule is in the law. Suppose you didn't want to have just to have one child, but you wanted to have two children. The law says if you have less than 6 weeks between the end of the previous parental leave and the new maternity leave, then you will get a new parental leave. What I didn't tell you before is parental leave was a system that is only available for working mothers. So if you do not get this automatic renewal, what is the alternative? You would have to go back, work, and then have a second child. And that's, you know, that would force you to have some arrangements for your very, very small child. Now, the interesting thing is that the period between the two solid blocks was first 12 months, then 24 months. Let me show you how that happens. So here, we're going to look at all women who had one child. They had it in June or July. If they had it in June, the automatic renewal period was 12 months plus about 3 months, about 15 months. If they had the first child in July, this automatic renewal period is about 27 months. It's 12 months more. So those women who had the child in June had a 32% chance of having another child within 3 years. Those women who had their first child in July had a 37% chance of having a first child in next 3 years. So there's really a sharp increase in fertility. If you put it, you know, in relative to the baseline rate, it's a big increase. How did it happen? For that, we looked very detailed about when the new child was born. So the black dots here, they're for women who had their child in June. And so for them, parental leave ended here, and sort of renewal ends around here. And you can see fertility, so this is the time between birth. Fertility is 0 in the first 8 months. It's a typical time from conception to birth is 9 months. And you can see some children are really born after 9 months. It's but then fertility goes up, but then it stays flat for those who have only 15 months for renewal. The red line here, you know, goes up initially slower, but then it really goes up a lot. And it looks like this possibility to have a continuous parental leave is extremely valuable to these parents, and they really exercise it. Now, you could say maybe this is just shifting children through time. You know, maybe everybody has 2 children at the end. And from what we can see, this is actually not taking place. So what do we have here? It's just the same. It's looking at the number of the share of women here with a second child, and here it's the time after the first birth. And you can see these vertical lines here, they're the parental leave periods. And so the dashed cord are those women in June. They end up having, you know, 60% of them end up having a second child after 10 years after the policy change. And those who had the child in July, they end up having about 3% more children. So there are some children born here in that system, thanks to automatic renewal. And so this is some first evidence of so work-life balance that maybe have been improved. How about leave reserved to fathers? That's a very important topic. It was a big discussion in Switzerland, even though it was ludicrous to think about 2 weeks of paternity leave changing a lot, except for fathers being there. But several countries provide paternity leave, and it's quite a lot. So in Sweden, there are months that are reserved to the other parents. Now, the evidence that we find is in Sweden, there's no real evidence that when you started reserving some of the leave to fathers, and fathers really took it up. I mean, it's not a problem of not take up. Those fathers didn't stay with their child more once the child was 7 and in school and ill. There's sickness leave that you can take as a parent in Sweden, and it can be the mother or the father, but it used to be the mother still, even though those daddies had taken a daddy month. In Germany, I found a study that's more descriptive. It's looking at the German system, and those men who took long parental leaves, they were involved more in the household. I wouldn't call this a causal study, but it's suggestive that the gender balance might be changing. All right, so I talked about family leave. Parental leave has time for care for a newborn. It affects the return to previous job. There's no incremental labor market penalty, fertility effects. This is something I didn't really talk about. Possibly it imposes a cost on firms and new hire. That's a very active line of research now. I'm familiar with one paper on Sweden, for instance, that shows that the wage bill goes up. So firms that have to hire replacement hires, they often hire more than is just enough to compensate for the person that is not here. The effects on productivity per worker or profits, they're not so clear cut. So this is why I'm talking about a possible effect on firms. We don't see very similar careers between fathers and mothers from the systems that have been assessed. And they don't ensure a comprehensive return to work, at least not in this very old setting that I looked at. So let me talk about childcare now. Okay, so what is childcare? Childcare is again, a policy that is possibly subsidized. It's often a private setting system regulated with subsidies, but it offers care to young children. Offers time for parents to care for young children. It's like the sequence to parental leave. It is valuable to working parents because they continue on the job. But I think one thing that's important here, it's possibly the first school experience for children. It's a preschool experience, of course. It's not, the children in childcare don't sit on chairs and have to be all quiet. They play around, but the environments are specifically often designed for children to learn. And so that's why I think we're interested in does it affect child development? This is a very important question also from a policy perspective, because in Switzerland, we hear a lot that, it's the care provided by mothers is really special. And in German, there's the saying that if you're working and while your child is small, then you're a raven mother, right? You had this child, but you don't even care for it and you go away. So that's why it's important to understand. So what does childcare do to a child's development? And then labor force and fertility is going to be quite parallel to parental leave. So let me show you a Nobel Prize winner in economics, Jim Heckman. He got the Nobel Prize for econometrics, by the way. But what he is really interested in is at what point in time in a person's life does it make sense to train people? Jim Heckman did a lot of econometrics in a training setting, which is really difficult. But his conclusion is really, that the best programs are very early in life. Why? Because the brain is very malleable and there's a huge horizon. If you know, starting to train me at 48 years is you know, the horizon is just shorter, and we're maybe malleability is still here, but not so much. So inspired by this research agenda by Jim Heckman, we went out, and with Christina Felfe, actually, who is a specialist on child development, we looked at how being in a child care center affects your language skills, your motor skills, and your socio-emotional skills. So we're particularly interested in socio-emotional because of also Heckman's research agenda arguing non-cognitive aspects are actually more important than whether we can do maths, for instance. Socio-emotional is really regulation of emotions. We look at Germany, which expanded childcare, and one particular feature that we can tease out here is that if you have a situation where childcare offers go from 10 for 100 to, let's say, 30 for 100, then you're really interested in what happens to the children that get in because you expand the system, right? So those who are in, when you only have 10 seats, they're children of people who can, you know, plan ahead, sign them up in waiting lists. But as you expand the system, you really see whether your policy is worthwhile. So one thing we see here in these graphs, so that's what these graphs show, are the effects of attending formal childcare, and it's very regulated, German style, compared to not attending childcare. And that is typically care provided by your mother. It could be also informal care, but that's much less frequent. And so the line here at 0, that's basically the baseline without childcare. That's the care provided by the mother. So if this line is above, it means that the childcare center adds something. And if it's below 0, it means that the childcare center is not doing things as well as your mother could do. And the most the interesting thing here is the x-axis, and here we're sorting individuals, children, by the ease of access. So this is like a sort of a hypothetical cost of entering childcare, and the cost here is very high. So those are children who are typically excluded from childcare if you only offer very little childcare. And here are the children that really are always in the childcare center. Now, what we can see here, I talked a long time, but the effects are not statistically significant from 0 for language skills. They're not for all children. Immigrant children benefit in terms of language skills like you would expect, but that's sort of the main cognitive skill we see. So that isn't affected very much. You can see one funny thing is, you know, that the children of parents who can place their children in childcare, think of them as, you know, highly educated and two-earner families, they benefit a lot from, in terms of motor skills. They can climb trees in childcare and do everything else. If you go on, you have less of an effect. So children that are added later on, their outside option is actually as good as childcare. Now let me show you the last effect here. This is on socio-emotional skills. We see no effects of childcare on children that can easily get into childcare, but the effects are strong and positive for those who are excluded because we ration childcare too much. So that's our main finding from this paper, is that, you know, expanding childcare, as Germany did, basically included a lot of children with problems regulating socio-emotional skills, and we find, for instance, boys benefit a lot of that expansion. All right, so then there's two other elements that I'd like to add. They're also based on the great German expansion of childcare. There's some more details on this expansion here, but I just wanted to highlight here that, again, if this expanding childcare had a significant effect on the number of children being born in municipalities in Germany that expand the childcare supply. And here, you know, you can read this as, this is the time axis, and T is the time when the municipality creates additional slots in childcare. So T-2, T-1, those are the years ahead. And you can see women whose child is born in these years here, they don't have an additional, so in the years before opening the new childcare centers, there's no effect on the birth rate. And there is a significant effect in the year and in the year after. So again, childcare is something that's very important for us to be able to, have the family lives and the work lives that we have. Here is a graph on the effects of kindergarten. It's the German system, which has it that if you are 3 years old when the school year starts, that's the 36 months old children, then you get immediately into kindergarten. But if you're 35 months old, then it's more difficult. It's still possible that you get into the kindergarten right away, but it's only at 36 where you can start more easily. And not all the parents enroll their children in childcare. You can see it's not, attendance is not 100%, but there is a sizable effect on you having childcare in kindergarten. And then if you look at working hours of mothers, it's a bit more noisy, but those mothers who had a child that was 35 months old at the start of the last kindergarten year, they're less likely to work. They're working 11 hours per 11 hours per week. And if you look at those with children who are 3 years old, they work about 14.5 hours per week. So there's an increase by about 3 hours per week that is generated by these additional children that were able to attend kindergarten. Huge policy challenge. The costs of childcare are very different. So they're very high in some contexts. Here, Switzerland. The Czech Republic, that's something that is interesting for the discussion. It seems to have very low cost of accessing childcare. And still, some people I talked to told me that it's very hard to get, and maybe that's the rationing device. So that's, in a way, if we'd like to encourage this system, we need to work on the childcare costs, especially those countries who have very high costs. Okay, so childcare is the first preschool. It can help socio-emotional skills. Childcare is crucial for better work-life balance. And there's both a short-term and the long-term increase in productivity. So the long-term increase is the effects of childcare in terms of regulating socio-emotional skills. Those are the Heckman returns, right? So that there's better training. And the short-term effect is you can offer childcare, and for those who would like to and have possibilities to work, you can these people can work. All right, pensions. We're getting closer. We were at the start of the life cycle. Now we zoom into the middle. I thought about saying also things about the middle of the life cycle, but I didn't come up with lots of social insurance programs. The social insurance program here is the pension system that provides support. It's under huge pressure. The old age worker, I mean, the dependency ratio is around 25 now, and it's bound to increase to 60 in the space of a couple of years. Now, we all know this, right? So that we need to reform the pension system. But I've talked with a few of you about the Czech Republic. It's very difficult. Also, Switzerland is a disaster. It doesn't. There's not much happening. Pensions are very hard to reform because they're basically promises. And once you start changing and renegotiating on a promise, everybody will distrust you, and it's hard to find reforms that would go down with the public. But what I'd like to talk about here is something, it's motivated by the sustainability of the pension system. It's a very important aspect. I'd like to talk about the reform, and I'd like to talk about a specific reform that on one hand allows us to understand how people make pension claiming decisions. That's an important decision. There's a second one, which is, when to stop working. and in a way, conceptually, they are not the same, but they're very often linked. And how are people really impacted by pension reforms? Again, I'm a bit biased. I'm going to talk now about Switzerland, and the title of the slide is intentionally a Swiss design. What do I mean by this? This is a reform that changed the full retirement age for women. The reform happened or was voted in 1997. Again, it's a reform that took place a long time ago, but it affected many women entering retirement until 2013-14. So what did it do? Let me show you these acronyms. FRA 62 is for full retirement age at 62. So the full retirement age is at 62 for women. The only reason this reform is for women is because the full retirement age for men was 65, and the parliament at that point in time, majority male, found it easier to save some money on the women than on the men. It's a bit of a, it's not the perfect way to do policy now. It wouldn't pass anymore. Okay, so that's the situation before the reform. Full pension at 62, then increase the full retirement age to 63. So far, so good. Now, you could still take the full retirement age pension at 62. Right? So if you increase full retirement age, you don't want to force people. You can still take it early. Now, the one thing that's really special here is the rate at which we reduce your pension is 3.4%. That doesn't mean anything to me. It's just like this. But I'm going to show you that's actually really, really low. And why I call this the Swiss design is you can see the 3.4 rate is applied whenever they increase the pension age to 64. That's the second step. But then once they leave this pension age at 64, they double the cost. For an economist, this is perfect, right? It's changes in the full retirement age, unrelated to changes in incentives. So let me show you now first just, so one thing about claiming is, what you could think about is, what is my social security wealth? Social security wealth is just, the pension benefits you would get for the rest of your lifetime. And we have very detailed, life tables from our own data set so that we can actually calculate this for every woman individually. So discounted up until today. So let me show you what we get. The most important lines are the blue one. So the blue one is the wealth a woman was promised in the old system before the pension reform, about 370,000 Swiss francs from this first pillar. Now, and it's flat, it's flat in the age at which you take the pension, 62 or 63 or 64 or 65. These women could delay pensions, and pensions were increased for delays. So it's about actuarially fair. Whenever you take the pension, doesn't matter. You have those 370,000 K, right? So here it's really, it's a choice. It's a preference when to take it, and most end up taking it here just because it's, it's a very salient part of your budget set. But let me show you what happens with the cohort that this one is they had a full retirement age at 63, but they could take the pension at 62. And what you see is, if you're just going for the best social security wealth, you're going to pick 62. That's, somewhat higher. I'm not saying it's a huge amount, but it's higher. It's like if you want the money, if you want to maximize the money, then you take it here and you have 20,000 more on average. The second thing, of course, is, the reform does take away wealth, right? There's a huge wealth effect. And that's what people don't hate about pension reform. They're really losing on the promises that were made. Now, since this first step of reform, since it was really optimal to take your pension at 62, we just look at when do these women claim, right? Do they claim at 62 or 63? 62 is the money maximizing age, 63 is the retirement age. And let me see, let me show you. So here, that's the pension claiming hazard. It just says, you know, how many women are basically claiming their pension. At 61, nobody, because they can't. And at 62, pretty much everybody in the cohort 1938. So these are with the 62 years retirement age. But the women in 1939, so whose money maximizing age is still 62, we have some of them who take out their pension at 62. They do that, but many, and actually most, take it out at 63. And you might say, okay, maybe they're working and they don't want to take a pension and work because there's taxes and they can't figure out the taxes. So we can do this graph for women who don't work anymore. So they don't have to worry about working versus claiming, and it's the same picture. So these women are taking and claiming too early. Now, this is a graph about inequality. So this is the poorest people in the sample. These are the richest people in the sample. And I should note, we only see the women's earnings, so they might have spouses, and we don't factor this in. But what you see is that there's very unequal losses in Social Security wealth. What's the loss? That's the difference between the Social Security wealth you get from claiming at a particular age minus the Social Security wealth maximizing age. So that's what we calculate for every person. And the losses are about 20% of your income for the poor, and they're about half that for the rich. So this reform not only didn't it help people to make the right choices for them, but it also introduces inequality. And inequality in pension is another topic. It's when we calculate pensions, we think they are roughly, you know, equalizing, because the rich don't care, their pensions are capped and the poor pensions are basically lifted. And so when we calculate this, we look at this blue bar here, which calculates Social Security wealth, assuming population life expectancy for everyone. You can see the rich here have about 30% more Social Security wealth than the poor. So it's not quite equal, because benefits increase some with our earnings. But if you factor in differences in life expectancy, and that's for men here, then this gap even widens to 70%. So the pension system should actually, you know, really pay more to poor people and less to richer people if the goal was to achieve equality. Okay, so financial incentive is weaker than the statutory age effect. And there's also a great paper that I don't cite here, but on Germany that really shows this. We claim, and in our design, we can identify that there's a substantial proportion of the population that acts passive. So in terms of claiming, they basically adapt to whatever the government says. And maybe that's because, you know, the Swiss trust the government a bit too much. And in this case, in the first pension steps, this led to mistakes. And pensions can amplify inequality in lifetime wealth. We think they're equalizing them, but they actually don't. Okay, so the last part, here I'm taking the liberty just to sort of speculate about the demand for social insurance. Again, I'd like to go back to this picture. If you look at this, right, I discussed with a journalist just before, so why don't we all have the same system? Like, you have all this evidence, you know, parental leave is good, it helps parents, and childcare helps parents, and so some notion, if you have a situation where countries are sort of equal, we should sort of figure out a similar system. Now, here we see great diversity in approaches. Estonia, Finland, Hungary, they have very long leaves for mothers. Korea and Japan, that's something I didn't know before I prepared this. They have very long leaves for parental and home care leave for fathers. So is there something we can use to explain this? So I've never been to the Czech Republic, or only once in Prague in 1990, a long time ago. But you know, the salient aspect about this is history. There are parts of the world that experience a situation where the state was providing for many elements, and I think in terms of family policy equality between men and women, the socialist states had very different attitudes than we had here. The other is cultural attitudes, and with this I'm just talking about values or norms. So, for instance, there's this notion that there are traditional gender roles. Men do this, women do something else, and it happens to be women household, men at work, or a child suffers if the mother works. Those are things we tell ourselves. And maybe we don't really, and it's not so much that there are statements about whether this is right or not, but they justify things. Now, I went to the European Values Survey of 2017, and I measured the fraction agreeing to the statement traditional gender roles. So 0 means I disagree with the statement that men are at work and women in the household, but you know, 35%, like Azerbaijan, that indicates quite some. That's like a gender specialization in household and market work. The second element that I was just curious about, it didn't end up explaining a lot. Is the state responsible for providing versus the individual? That's sort of the socialist attitude. We're a state, and the state is in charge of, you know, providing. That's a very general notion in the statement that the question that they asked. I would have asked it a bit more clear. Or is it the individual? And here you can see, you know, state responsibility. And then I use colors, and they refer to the historical experience. So blue is Western Europe, red, they are so-called satellite states of the USSR, and green are USSR states. And one thing that's really fascinating that jumps out really is USSR, former USSR members, they stand out as being very gender separated, right? They're just the upper hole on the graph. Whatever the state responsibility is, these are, you know, they're very gender specialized. Even if you look within Europe, I mean, Estonia, Lithuania, they have attitudes, and I was really surprised by this, because I had different image, but they're a bit more gender specialized. Then in terms of the state responsibility for providing, yes, so you do see that in Europe, when we talk about, say, you know, the differences between France and Switzerland, we always blow it up like it's huge. So in France, everything is the state, and in Switzerland, we do it all ourselves. But these attitudes of people, these differences are much smaller than between the different states of the different areas. So I wanted to show you that, because I think, you know, I do think the way people think is important, and especially, you know, in democracies. Now, before, so what did I do with this data? I just ran regressions. Here is the leave for both parents. This is the leave for just fathers, and this is participation in childcare. It's so this is childcare, father leave, parental leave. And the first line is gender roles. I also had this question about the state being responsible in it, but it didn't do anything. So I took it out. But one thing you see is if you have a very gender separated population, you are in a situation with a very long leave for women. You know, they can basically stay until the school starts, they stay home. And you don't have leave for fathers because they're actually working, they're supposed to be working. So we don't want that. For participation in childcare, it didn't do anything. The second element here is GDP. So log GDP, and you could see that, you know, it's the rich countries in the north that can finance a lot of, you know, a system of childcare that is big enough. I also controlled for the historical origin. So the origin itself doesn't do much. History is gone. And by controlling, these are notions that would be valid even within the three groups of countries that I showed. So there are some correlations. Let me show you, and I'm getting close to the end. Let me show you a little bit about my home country and how I think we can go beyond perhaps correlations. So one particularity is Switzerland is a country where there are different languages, but that's not special. I mean, there's many countries in the world. There's Belgium and India has super many languages. The one thing that's special about this map, so this is a map of Switzerland with municipalities, and the gray areas are those where people talk German, and the dark areas are those where people talk Latin. It says in the legend, but of course we're not really talking Latin when I go out the door here in Lausanne. Lausanne is here. We're talking a Romance language, French, Italian, or here it's also Romansh. So those are the language regions. And one thing that's fascinating here is there's a part of the there's a border between language regions that doesn't coincide with administrative borders. So the black borders here, these here, those are canton borders. But what I've just outlined or highlighted, those are segments, difference of the country where people speak different languages, but they're within the same institutional environment. They're going to the same types of schools, they have the same tax system, and so on. All right, so here, that goes back to the introduction of Ambassador Guex. These are voting results, where the question was, would you like in Switzerland to have maternity leave? This is a vote in 1999, where the end result was no. And the data points here to the left of the red line, they're people who live in the German-speaking areas, so in the light gray areas. The point here is just on the German side of the language border, and the point here is on the French-speaking side of the language border. And what you can see is the support in the German parts is 32%, and it's 60% in the region where I live. So in the end, this was rejected, but you see a huge gap right at the border. And there's different reasons for why there is this gap. There's different attitudes to how families should be constructed, and it's by no means just here. There's 3 votes. You know, with maternity leave, it was rejected so many times. We can really do several checks. We can do robustness checks, but in all cases, we see a gap. Okay, so what is this? What is this about? We've seen that the social insurance system varies a lot, and it seems to correlate with attitudes, and I think it just goes back to the fact that policies are designed within socio-cultural contexts. So they need to fit this, right? If we're going to be able to advance in a particular direction if our attitudes and ways of looking at how to organize life change. And this may take some time. It can take a lot of time. So with this, I would like to conclude. I looked at basically at the impacts of family policy. My conclusion is it works in those areas that I looked at, and maybe there's also some publication bias here. So the papers that came into existence, they show that the things that we look at worked. But maybe the more important thing is, you know, these policies work because we can't rely on markets to do those things all the time. A big caveat here, many large companies design systems for family care for their employees that are way more generous than the system that exists from the state. But we'd like to have everyone access to a certain basic, package of family leave, and that's something that the state can provide. Time for care, time for work, work-life balance. Now, one thing I tried to show you, we cannot assume, especially with pensions, that people understand all the details. We're pretty sure our calculations are correct, and we've discussed them with actuaries. But what we see is that there's a sizable number of people who actually made the wrong decision in terms of pension claiming. So that's a huge challenge for pension reform, is how to communicate well what's going to happen. And all these policies, they are set within a cultural context. So if we'd like to understand why we cannot advance in providing more childcare at a lower age, maybe we need to really also look at, how do people conceive their lives, and what is it, how does it fit, and then it may be more easy. So thank you so much for the time and attention. I'm really glad about talking about all of these topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lalive. Please, can you unshare your presentation? So that's perfect. Everything works. Thank you very much again. I can't stress enough how important the same issues are important and relevant for the Czech Republic. Of course, there are many other details. And because we know this well, we invited Mrs. Martina Stepankova-Stibrová from Ministry of Labor, Director of the Department of Family Policy there, who would provide us 10 minutes reflection. So I would ask her to unmute and I see questions coming in the chat. So I'm encouraging you to put other questions there. I will summarize them and ask them when the panel starts its work at the last third of the event. So do you have Mrs. Stepankova-Stibrová there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect.
Just prepare my presentation.
Internet is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I try to put the presentation on a full screen, but we could start right now because we don't have so much time yet. My name is Martina Stibrová. I'm from Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, and I should briefly present you some key information about family policy in the Czech Republic.
I can give you technical advice. Everybody will apologize. If you run PowerPoint presentation, there are in fact two active program. One, this one which we see, and another one, this full screen presentation. So maybe you can turn down the shared projection and start again running the activated version, activated window.
Okay.
So start it and then go back, unshare, and share again. We'll try. If it doesn't work, we'll be happy even with this version. Yes, unshare and now share again, but be careful. There should be offered two similar windows, one with full screen presentation, which is the one you want to select. Something is starting. It's again it's still the small one, but go on.
Okay, sorry.
We can live with that. That's fine.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to mention a few demographic trends typical for Czech Republic. It's a low birth rate. We we had 4 decades very low fertility rate, and from 2018 the fertility rate increased to 1.7 children per woman, which is slightly above the Europe Union average, but it's still not very, very high. The low birth rate is connected with the issue of aging, and for Czech Republic, the population projection shows that in 2015 almost 3 million people will be over 65. So that means that it will create, for example, 1/3 of overall population of the Czech Republic. We could also see, like in other European countries, changes of family structure, mainly increase of single parent families, and we also know that every second marriage ends up by divorce. As we know, the high risk of poverty is prevalent in families with single parent families or for families with 3 and more children. Currently, the situation of single parent families is getting worse, we could say, because of some measures connected with the pandemic situation, mainly closures of schools, etc. If we look on other slides, I would like to mention just a few information about the employment of women. Again, the Czech Republic is very typical with negative impact of parenthood on women and low employment rate of women. Colleague Klára Kališková will be speaking about this in more detail. So I just mentioned that the childbirth has a large impact on the labor market participation of women in Czech Republic, and we could also see huge consequences for later careers and also for pensions. The differences between pensions and men are approximately 2,000 crowns today. In the Czech Republic, we have very low use of flexible work arrangement. Before the pandemic situation in 2017 and 2018, it was approximately only 11% of women working on part-time. If we connected it with insufficient preschool childcare services, we could see that there is a huge problem for women in the gender pay gap, in a work career, etc. Although we invest in kindergartens and we support children's group, we still see that the participation rate in formal childcare for children under age 3 is approximately 5%. Also, the last research from European Trade Union shows that women in Germany and in Czech Republic will wait until 2021 for equal pay. Now the gender pay gap in the Czech Republic is 21%. But if we could look on a system of a family policy in Czech Republic, we had maternity leave up to 6 months of child's age, and we could you hear me? I'm just
yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
We hear you, but nicely.
I had some problem with the internet connection.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a maternity leave, and we could also have a maternity allowance, and the allowance is paid according to previous salary up to 70% of daily earnings. After the maternity leave, parent could choose to stay at home with children on parental leave up to 3 years of a child's age, and take the parental allowance, which is the parental allowance. The parents could choose the duration and the monthly amount of this allowance, and the total amount is 300,000 crowns since 2020. From 2018, we also have a paternity leave with allowance, but that means that the fathers could take 1 week of paid leave, again up to 70% of their earnings during the first 6 weeks after the childbirth. We don't have the special amounts or something like this for fathers to care about the children. From 2018, we have also a long-term care benefit for long-term carers who need to stay at home and care about relatives or somebody else. Concerning the labor code and some flexible working arrangements, we could have part-time jobs, flexible working time, home working, and also the amendment to the labor code regulate the job sharing concept. Concerning the childcare services, from 2014, we have a so-called children's group or creche for children from 1 to 6. Children's group are usually established by NGOs, private companies, or municipalities. We also have public kindergartens for children from 3 to mandatory school age. And from 2018, there is a legal claim for placement into kindergarten for children age 3 and older. In the Czech Republic, we could also find other measures how to support parents to come back to the labor market. And we also have a lot of project activities focused mainly on fighting with the gender pay gap or support using of flexible working arrangement. And we also focus on a quality of a childcare services, mainly in a children's group. All in all, when we look on this, the situation in Czech Republic is still typical by low uptake and flexible working arrangement, low participation of children in a preschool services, and low employment of women who are in an age of 30, 34 and have a small children. We also, from the data, we could also see that the involvement of fathers into care is very low. There is some measures who trying to fight with this problem, as you could see, but or right now we also should implement work-life balance, European work-life balance instruction. So we see if we will be able to find, for example, some new ways how to involve more fathers into care and how to support parents come back to the labor market. That's probably all from me, and thank you for attention.
Thank you very much for very clear outline. I would like to assure everybody that the PowerPoint presentations will be also made available at the end, not necessarily today, but tomorrow at the event website. So follow will another Czech reflection, which will be from the academic ranks, and it will be provided by Clara Karličková, who is an expert at IDEA at CERGE-EI. I'd like Clara to make sure that she opens the right big presentation and unmute the microphone. I'm sorry reminding, but I'm also making mistakes, so it's still not easy for me. So is Clara there?
Hello.
Great.
So
we see you. And
I hope you can also hear me now.
Yeah, everything is fine. We can hear you well.
Fine. So I will try to share the correct presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wait a minute to work. Okay, sorry.
No problem. Let me inform you that this is the first time we are broadcasting on Facebook simultaneously. So we are really global, becoming global these days. So all bad things are good for something. So we learn something, and Clara will hopefully make.
Well, it's telling me there's some problem, but I'm working on it.
Okay.
Yes.
We are patient. Yeah, something happens. And this one is again, yes, great.
Now you should see the.
Yeah, we are there, and you can start.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you can also hear me.
Yes.
Well, thanks a lot. Okay, so let me very briefly tell you something about the impact of these family policies in the Czech Republic on women and children. So Martina Štýbrová told you a little bit about what these policies are in the Czech Republic. So you already heard they are quite typical by having very long parental leaves. So let me tell you a little bit about what is the impact of these policies on the actual behavior of women, and at the very end also how they impact children. So first of all, this is a graph basically showing you how long do Czech women actually stay out of the labor market after giving birth. So we don't really have a data similar to Austrian data where we would have a return to work, like the specific date that the woman returned to employment, but we know what is the activity rate, basically the economic activity rate by the age of the youngest child. And here I split basically the sample to two. So the blue line here are, you can think of them as like low educated women, so without school leaving exam. And the red line here are the high educated women with completed high school or university education. And we can see that these two lines do differ at the very beginning already, but the share of women that actually return to work before the age is 3 is very low. Okay, it is around 20%. So most women do return to work when the child is 3, when the youngest child is 3. So the 3-year or even longer leave is what majority of Czech women actually choose. We can see that it is around 74% of women with higher education, that's here, that return when the child is 3 or are back in the labor market when the child is 3. But it is only about more than half of low educated women that are in the labor market when their child is actually 3. So there is still a lot going on when the child is in this 4 and 5-year-old. But what you can also see is that, you know, by the time child is at school, so 6 or 7 for most cases, like majority of women actually work. These numbers are pretty close to 1, and they are very close to the employment of men actually. So this is some I would say Czech particularity as well, that we have very high participation of women when they don't have children or have older children. So that's the one thing. Another thing that we actually studied in our research is whether this very long parental leave has any impact on unemployment. So we look at the unemployment rate here again for the the low educated and the high educated women by the age of the youngest child. The unemployment rate is a little bit tricky here because we know that this is calculated out of those who are back in the labor market. So it doesn't really make much sense to look at these numbers when the child is 1 or 2, because we know that there are very few women actually working. But we also know that most women actually return back to work when the child is 3, so here and here. And we can see that the unemployment rate at this point is very high. It is about 12% for the high educated women and 28% for the low educated women. So these are like pretty striking numbers. They are actually very unique, even in international comparison. When we look at the gender unemployment gap, for example, here. So these are the EU countries where they are sorted kind of by the gender unemployment gap. So the difference between unemployment of men and women. You can see that the Czech Republic strikes the first place here. So the data here is for 2015, where the female unemployment rate was 6.1% and the male unemployment rate was 4.2%. So the gap basically was almost 50% here on the graph, the largest one in the EU. And these numbers are quite stable over time. This is not just 1 year where, you know, we would have this large gap in the unemployment. And we can also see that it is mostly caused by the parenthood. Okay, when we look at here the unemployment to population ratio for 2014 for men and women separately, we can see that those that don't have children younger than 15, they have pretty much the same unemployment rate, no matter whether this is a man or a woman. But when we look particularly at those with preschool children, so children aged 4 to 6, this is where the large differences are. Okay, so women with preschool children really do have very high unemployment rate in the Czech Republic, while men have much lower ones. So this kind of might tell us something about the traditional gender roles, but we asked ourselves whether this is somehow connected to our system of generous parental leaves. So we already heard that the Czech Republic has very long paid parental leave. And in this paper, which is joint work with Alena Bečáková, we look at whether these long paid leaves might actually negatively affect the job continuity. So we look here at the intended consequences of these policies, which is basically the take up of the parental leave, but also the unintended consequences, which we think are exactly these post-leave unemployment, but we also look at post-leave inactivity. And in this paper, we try to get a bit closer to the causal claims. So we don't really look only at what is the situation, but we take the 2 reforms of parental leave that took place in 1995 and 2008 in the Czech Republic. And we use basically these reforms as a natural experiments. So the first reform from the 90s increased the duration of the benefit received, so basically the pay, from 3 to 4 years. Okay, while the second reform from 2008 basically allowed most women to shorten the benefit to 2 or 3 years. So we can think about this 2008 reform as like a partial reversal of the previous one. What is also interesting here about these Czech reforms is that throughout the whole period, the job protection was kept at 3 years. Okay, so this is something that Professor Lalive mentioned in his talk, that very often we would like to disentangle these 2 effects, right? The effect of the job protection and the effect of the benefit of the pay, right? So here in this setting, this is something very unusual, but it happened in the Czech Republic that the reform really only concerned the benefit received, not the job protection. So basically what happened in 1995 is that women were incentivized. I say women because back then it really were only women that took parental leave. They were incentivized to take 1 extra year of leave while basically having to give up the job protection, okay? Because the job protection really ended when the child was free. And we do find a surprisingly high take-up of this 4-year paid leave. So we actually found that 38% of women prolonged their leave beyond these 3 years after the reform. What is maybe even more striking to us is that when we look at the differences by education, the take-up was pretty similar. So we actually found that around 40% of low-educated women took the longer leave, while 36% of high-educated did. So this was really like not that much difference across education. And we also found quite large unintended effects. So as I mentioned, we think about these as the effects on post-leave unemployment and inactivity. So in particular, we found that this reform increased post-leave unemployment by 6 percentage points. And it also affected post-leave or increased post-leave inactivity by 7 percentage points, but only among high educated women. Okay. So this is also very, very interesting because we actually found that this longer leave actually led to even longer time that these women spent out of work, basically. And I don't want to take that much more time, so let me just jump to the last thing that I wanted to talk about during my talk here. This is another joint work with Alena Bičáková, where we kind of follow up on our previous findings and ask whether these long leaves actually have some impact on children. So, and in other words, we actually ask whether longer maternal care is always beneficial. So we take this 1995 reform again as a natural experiment, and we look at long-term child outcomes. The affected cohorts of children in our data are actually aged 21 to 22, so we can really look relatively long-term. And we actually found that there are quite large negative effects on human capital investments for children of low educated mothers. So for the low educated mothers, we actually found that their children are now 10 percentage points less likely to be in tertiary education or to have a tertiary degree, because at this age, this is like some of these young adults already have a bachelor degree. Some of them are still studying, so we kind of look at this joint outcome, so either being in tertiary education or having a degree, and we do found a quite large negative impact in this aspect for children of low educated mothers. And when we look at what do they do when they don't study, basically, we actually found that especially girls of low educated mothers are much more likely to be inactive doing housework. Okay. So basically the conclusion of this work, this is an unpublished work yet, is that spending extra year with your mother, especially when the mother is low educated at the age of 3, might actually negatively affect your human capital investments later on in life. And while this might be striking to some from the audience, it is actually in line with the literature that looks on the effects of universal childcare and actually finds some positive effects on child outcomes. Because in our case, in the 1990s, the alternative to the maternal care was basically a public childcare facility, the kindergartens. So basically what happened in the 90s when this reform was put in place was that the 3-year-old children, instead of being in the kindergarten, they were at home with their mothers. And it actually seems, at least according to our results, that this had some negative effects if the mother was low educated. Okay, so let me stop right here. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any questions that are directed at this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clara. It was a very perfect presentation. The only thing, please, on screen. Perfect. And I want to thank everybody because it's everything is going very smoothly, and we will reward you by the panel discussion now. The advantage, the online presentation events have advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that there is no refreshment offered at the end, and you know these events usually are served with very good refreshment. But on the other hand, you have the advantage that you do not need collective breaks. You can take a break when you are unmuted and muted, and we can go on. So I will not make any break. I will just invite our speakers to get ready, to be ready to follow my questions, which I am collecting on the chat. It's also a call for another questions. We already have some interesting questions there, so I have some food for thoughts. Please let me suggest that when I ask question, to make everything easy, follow the order of how you presented. So first Professor Lalive, then Mrs. Stepankova-Stibrová, and then Klara Kališková. Of course, you can say I don't have anything to say, because this will very simplify our coordination. This being said, I will go to the chat and find out the first question, and now listen carefully. I will go slowly so that you can understand. It's a little bit longer question. What is an optimal policy designed that usually interact paternity leave and childcare policy with respect to employment, fertility, and skills of children? In particular, I am interested in parameters of length of leave and starting age for childcare for everyone. I hope you could understand, because I have very small computer, and it's very difficult to read for me. So I hope the question was clear. And now I would like to ask Professor Lalive to start, unmute his microphone, and let us know what are the parameters. It's a tough question, I know.
So I thank you, Daniel. But after Clara's presentation, I realized that she's maybe more into the literature. I'd like to give priority to her, if you would like to.
I agree. Clara is smiling. So
would you like to start, Clara?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. So I think this really is a very tough question. It has been studied a lot, obviously, in the literature. I think if there is any consensus, then we know that leaves that are shorter than 1 year are definitely beneficial for both the mother and the child. And then I think there is some kind of gray area where there has to be some balance between, what is good for the kind of labor market outcomes of the mother and what is good for the child outcomes. And then obviously, I think there is a lot of evidence that around the age of 3, it is for most children actually beneficial to be at some form of childcare. So we kind of confirm that, and as I mentioned, there is more literature focusing on the effects of childcare that actually show that for children older than 3, childcare is definitely beneficial. So I'm not sure that I actually answered the question. The parameters are obviously tough to set up, but I think there is definitely a consensus that we should have parental or maternity leave at least until the child is 1. It should be well paid with job protection. That this kind of length of leave is not harming mothers very much, and it is beneficial for children. And then there probably should be some like slow return to the labor market. There is some literature that shows that both for women and for children, it is definitely beneficial to kind of do small steps. So to start working part-time while the child starts attending childcare part-time, and then slowly build up to kind of full-time work and full-time childcare. Yeah, that's probably everything that I can tell to that.
Perfect, thank you. And I see a raised hand by Professor Švejnar, if I'm right. So please, your microphone, please. Unmute.
Yes, I'm unmuting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much both for the presentation, Rafael, and for the discussions, the two discussions from the Czech side. I have a question. What is interesting in the presentation by Rafael, the fact, if I understand it correctly, that it's kind of behavioral economics type thing, that people in Switzerland are retiring at the age that the government in a way recommends, but which is not most advantageous for them financially, if I'm right. And I'm wondering, as I understand the US literature, there is a situation which is sort of opposite in terms of age structure, but similar, where people who are not financially constrained and are have long life expectancy don't take advantage of the fact that they can start taking Social Security later, say at the age of 70, as opposed to early, because and the surprising finding is because the appreciation that they would get in terms of the pension is extremely high. And especially at time of zero interest rates, they're keeping money in banks at low interest rate or zero, where if they delayed by 1 year, the intake of the pension, the Social Security benefits, they would get something like 7% interest rate on that. Is that related? And if so, why? But it's going in the opposite direction in the sense that people wait too long rather than going, don't wait too long in Switzerland, don't wait enough in the United States.
Yes, thank you. I think it's related. Actually, the first paper on this phenomenon was published in 2012 on the US by Gell and his co-author. So that's I think it's really a fascinating piece of evidence that pops up in many pension systems around the world. And I think there is a group of behavioral economists around Stefano Della Vigna who want to push this as saying, well, this is because our preferences are dependent on a reference. And what the government is doing is it's setting the reference. It's the early retirement age in the US, I think 62 or so, that's the earliest age, and people start thinking, okay, I can take it then. And whatever they do to depart from that has some cost. Some psychological cost, and so they miss out on the financial gains that they forego. But this should actually now, I mean, given what you said, I think this should be going down now. I mean, at some level, we believe in financial incentives, and they should be. It's just a change in the utility function, and we tried to publish this paper, but we were also talking to people, and we realized this notion of reference dependence might be quite powerful, because it's also, I think there's evidence in job search, and I've seen in the chat that somebody said, why don't we talk about saving jobs instead of family policy right now? I understand it's a crisis, but just that's why I'd like to make this departure. Also in job search, people, when they approach the end of benefits, they are searching for jobs really desperate. And that's not the surprising part. That's what everybody would do. But what happens after they hit the end of their exhaustion, they continue to search for a while, but then their search effort gradually goes down. And this is something you cannot really rationalize by saying, oh, I care about what I can finance right now, because the financial shock stays the same. I have a high transfer, then a low transfer. So if there's, if this is a subsidizing search, then then I would search more. So what I wanted to say with this is just, it seems to be that both in terms of how long we work and how much we search, there's some things that, that we're very sensitive to baselines and references. And some countries really just abolish it. I don't know about the Czech Republic, I should have read more, but Sweden doesn't have a pension age. Between 60, 70, you can do whatever you want. And my reading is there's some bunching at 60 and some at 70, but it's more a gradual process, not so fixed onto one particular age.
I may ask one more thing, which is kind of more of a curiosity. You had the case of the women who give birth early July versus late June, and you exploit that discontinuity there in terms of belonging to different regimes. And I'm wondering whether you're finding that women actually some time the birth in such a way that they would go into the more advantageous regime. And what made me think about it is some of you may have noticed a former colleague of mine at the University of Michigan, Joe Slemrod, actually looked at the death rate and related tax effect of the estate tax. And he found that there is actually an anomaly that people, rather than dying the 1st of January, tend to die on December 31st. And there is a statistically significant effect. So nobody wanted to speculate that there is something intentional about it, but obviously there is a statistical effect. So I'm wondering whether you're finding a similar effect here in a situation where it would be much more easy and in some sense acceptable.
So here, the reform was announced in November and implemented in June. So biology says anticipation is pretty hard.
Right. That's you induce or not induce or whatever, right? Yeah.
No, exactly. So we did look at terminated, delays in pregnancies, right? But then we talked about with doctors, and that's really difficult.
Yeah.
I guess you can induce a pregnancy, but that's not what you want here.
You wanted to go the other way, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so thank you. It was really fascinating. I wanted to praise all of you guys. It was very good. But we have some other questions. Yeah, so I'll stop.
Thank you.
Yes. We have 2 other questions from the chat. I will present them step by step. The first one comes from Kristina Hrehova from CERGE-EI, and I will read it. I would like to hear also about other policies, such as unemployment benefit policies, activation works, personal bankruptcy, and other policies, such as those introduced as help to employees during the pandemic. What do we know in general about these? I think in the context of the current situation, these policies are crucial as well. So this is COVID related, and the other will be also COVID related. So what are the answers? Rafael, do you have any answer?
So yes, I was talking to the Swiss embassy, Rolf Ott, and he told me that this would have been a good topic as well. and so in the crisis, so it depends on whether your government announces a lockdown or not. And we had a sort of a semi-lockdown where so we had a lockdown of activities that led to many contacts. And in that context, policy is extremely important. So I can tell you what happened here. So all, say, shops, retail and hairdressers, they had to stop activity from one day to the next. It was just forbidden by an executive order. And what happens there is you have to think about the people employed and also about the shop owners. And the response for the people who are employed was short time work was available, and it became available really at a very low cost. Normally, you have to apply for it, and then there's a government official that say, really, you know, it checks, is this really just a temporary decrease in demand? Right in March when it happened, everybody got it basically who wanted it, and you just had to fill out one form, send it, and literally about 30% of the entire labor force was working in firms that applied for short-time work. Imagine, you know, if you let go of all these people, this is more than the US increase in unemployment. So that's what happened. And of course you have the UI system, that's the regular system. And that is going to absorb those people whose employers don't think they can survive, or whose employers think that the job that the person is doing won't survive, right? Then those are the people you let go into unemployment. And we had some increase, but it was about 1 percentage point in unemployment. And so I'm really convinced that in a situation of a lockdown, you need short-time work. The details certainly matter, but you want short-time work to be accessible fast. And of course, you're going to have abuse. And I discussed this with my students, and they were really much less naive than I was. So they said, oh, why wouldn't somebody say they have 1,000 people instead of just 5, and all that? Of course, you're going to have that, but the cost of not being there and ensuring for this short amount of time. We know now that the waves maybe, you know, we don't have enough data, but a wave will last maybe 3-4 months if you do a lockdown, because lockdowns always reduce, and so it's a temporary shock. So you want to have short-time work because that's exactly what it's designed for. The other thing is you're going to have a lot of business owner lobbying for payments to, you know, to their businesses, and here you have to. What Switzerland did, I think, was actually quite smart in the end, is just offered credits. So if you really need money, I can give you, but you give it back. And income support for self-employed, because self-employed are sort of they were not covered by any other social insurance. So we created that, and I'm not saying so the Swiss response was optimal. I guess there's always things you can do better, but this worked really well. Now, the situation with the second wave for us is one where we really hope we don't have a second lockdown. And I don't think really locking down activities in shops helps a lot. Usually you get a lot of reduction in economic activity just because people are afraid of the virus. They're careful. So you don't really need the lockdown, but maybe you still have activities like tourism that will have to just close completely, and you have to offer them solutions, especially for the workers. Yeah.
Thank you. So if Clara or Mrs. Stepankova-Tibrova wants to comment on this, probably not, or they are, okay, it seems not. So I see Philippe. So not to forget about Philippe from CERGE-EI. Philippe, please ask your question, but I have another COVID-related question in the chat. So please go on, Philippe.
So your presentation of the research about retirement age was that the government can be norm setter, let's say, or setting somehow the norm where to go to retirement. So how do you see the government role in the family policy as a let's say stereotype setter or norm setter? Because you were saying that the policies should be set according to the culture in the society, but it can be also that this government can affect what people think they should go back to work, at which age of the child, and so on. So this is my main question.
So I think the relationship between our norms and the policies we have is two-way. So the norms somehow define what we can imagine changing, And then I also think once you change things, the norms adapt. And there's actually a fascinating research project by, her name is Martina at CERGE-EI, who is a postdoc, and she looked at changing norms about female hygiene, and just through information and the attitudes of women in India with respect to that changed completely. So that's an example for me where, as you said, you know, the policies we put in place, they change the attitudes we have. So we put in place a very short leave at 14 weeks for fathers, and I expect that employers will also grant, you know, somewhat longer but maybe unpaid leaves to fathers now. Yeah.
Thank you. So, if Clara or Mrs. Stepanka do not have anything to add, I will go directly to the other question on COVID. It's not what's going on now or during the second wave. It's post-COVID question. I'm running several applications here. Here, I'm almost there. Yes. So the question comes from Lina from the chat. Thank you very much for the incredible talk. May I ask you how you think childcare or pensions, work time benefits change after COVID era, especially taken account high current unemployment, more elderly people, and increase of robotics and artificial intelligence? End of the question.
So I don't know, Martina, did you want to comment on this?
Maybe I could try it. If I understand well, the question is about how it's changed with the robotic and modernization of employment, or? If you are saying something, I don't hear you because you are mute.
See, I make mistakes too. So again, it asks about post-COVID era. So despite that, we don't know when it will finish. It might be in 6 months or a year or 2 years. What will be the impact on these childcare pension work time benefits, taking into account robotics and artificial intelligence developments, which I think go hand in hand, and these are boosted by what is happening this year?
Well, I think that even nowadays we could see that, for example, in the Czech Republic, if we in 2017 we had only 11% of women working part-time. So I think the last study or last number are talking about this, that 69% of employees working at home or on some flexible working arrangement. So we could see that this pandemic era has a real impact on a labor market participation and on how we work. And concerning the childcare services, we still believe and see that support childcare services is crucial for women mainly who are in the Czech Republic the main carers, and I don't think that it's really change in the future, mainly for those women who are single mothers, etc., who needs their job. But also we have to say that if there will be some economic download, that probably women in the Czech Republic will be the group who stay at home and will take care about the children or stay at home unemployed, etc. And this is what we are really concerned now, that during the second pandemic second pandemic wave, again, we see that the schools are closed, and we are really afraid of the impact on women, women with the children, who has to care and should care about the children. Yeah, so that's for me.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any other comment from those two panelists, virtual panelists? Yeah, Rafael?
I think it's a great question because COVID, we expect it to change a lot. And I think the impacts are profound. So two words were mentioned, different kinds of work, working from home, more in the services sector, digitalization. So digitalization, the logic is there, I mean, to the extent that the jobs are being destroyed just individually, employers are going to rebuild those jobs. But now, since there are technologies available that help them to do a lot of jobs without people or with different people, I think there will be there will be more job destruction in jobs that can more easily be automated. We looked at this in the financial crisis, and we're also seeing people losing their jobs more in jobs that can more easily be substituted by machines. That's the bad news for home office. The saying in Switzerland is, oh, now we had home office, so let's do it again, because the employees like it. It's like a 5% pay rise, especially if you commute a lot. It's 10% if you can work from home, and who would refuse that? But employers are very reluctant. Why? Because you need to figure out a whole new production function around home office. Who can have it and why, and for how long? So those questions, they're really not clarified yet. But on the whole, I think of course we're going to work more from home, and that's good news, especially outside COVID season. If it's COVID times with lockdown and schools are. So I heard schools are closed in the Czech Republic, right? So what this means is you're working from home, but twice, right? There's two jobs. There's caring for a child, and there's working for your employer. And I heard stories about a single mother. Basically, she worked during midnight to 6 for the employer, and throughout the day she was caring for her young child. So that's really disastrous. But after COVID, this will be different. So we will have the schools that provide this, and home office will be an interesting way to work. The one thing I fear is that we lose this resynchronization. So when we go to work, we exchange with people we don't really know. If we work from home, we exchange mostly with people, with our family, really, intensely, and people from work, but only about work stuff. And so everything outside work that also makes a firm is something you need to get a handle on if you want to continue, having a corporate culture. And yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Interestingly, I have also some answer, very partial, but some answer to this question. Next Monday, we are going to publish a new study on the capacity of the Czech labor market to adapt via home officing. And I can show you a graph which we produced based on our, I think, a little bit unique longitudinal study of families during COVID era. So let's check my skills, if I can share one picture with you. It's in Czech, but I will outline. It shouldn't be a problem. So if everything works, you see a very simple graph, time series, dates on the axis. Interrupt me if you don't see it. And you see the proportion of people working or turning to home office during COVID, the first wave. These are percentage points on the left-hand side, and in different areas of the economy. So the green is trade and services, to see very little effect and a huge impact in IT and finance, and public sector very small. So this is just kind of advertisement of what we will publish soon, unique experience from the field. But of course, we don't know what will be the second wave and after COVID. So I'm unsharing. I don't see any other question in the chat. I know we already started third hour already, so it's quite long. It seems people are still interested. There are many people watching on the Facebook and this Zoom. So this is called for the last question. If there is any from the audience. I can't check Facebook at this moment, or I could, but there are probably no questions. Yeah, there is a question. Yeah, so there is a question on Facebook.
Daniel, sorry,
yes?
Can I jump in? I'm really sorry, but
yes?
I have to go. Family life calling. You can.
That's true. We know of.
In the other
yeah,
yeah. Say hello to everyone. Thanks for the great talks. I really enjoyed it, but I won't be able to answer this last question. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me ask a last question from the Facebook, and it's very simple. It would be interesting to talk about mental health of these unemployed women. I know it's tough. If there is anything to say, please. Otherwise, we can say it's still something to research. So Rafael and Švejnar asking, right?
So I think this is really a question Clara should answer. She's the expert. I find her finding about unemployment after leave really fascinating, but I think this is maybe she, I don't know, maybe, yeah, she should answer to that. I think it's a great question.
We'll try later in post-event stuff. Let me know that the Facebook is late by 15 seconds about. So now I was watching you giving bye to Clara while you was already listening to my questions. So sorry for some confusion. I will disconnect from Facebook now. Okay, so if there are no other questions, there is time to conclude. And the conclusion is mainly about thank you. And I have to thank primarily to people behind, people you don't see, but who contributed and secured that we could run this first fully online global event with the Swiss Embassy. And these people are Blanka Jarvorova for all the logistics, Jakub Schichta for all the streaming, IT technology, and Barbara Kvasinichkova for Facebook arrangements. And then let me thank you to the embassy people there, Ralph Ott and Sonia Chryslerova, and in particular to Mr. Ambassador Philippe Guex, who without them this wouldn't happen definitely. And special thank naturally goes to Professor Rafael Lalive, who contributed great green presentation. And I can assure you, before you unmute your microphones and clap your hands, I can assure you that these events with the Swiss Embassy have huge impact on public debates, public policies making. So this is not the end of the day. We expect follow-up debates in the Czech Republic on this. So thank you very much for the event. And now everybody is allowed to unmute and clap your hands to all those mentioned and unmentioned.